Hey everyone, and welcome back to our next lesson, CSS Basics. Today we'll be covering what CSS is, a little history on CSS, as well as some do's and don'ts. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet, and it's the way we tell the browser how we want our HTML to look. CSS was introduced back in 1996. Back then, really all it could do was manipulate the look and feel of text on the screen. It could do things like change the text color, change the background color of the text, and even change the size of the text as well as the style of the text. In 1998, CSS2 was introduced. This could do a little bit more than the original CSS by introducing the ability to define layouts. In 1999, the big jump was to CSS3, and that's what we're currently using today. When it first came out, CSS3 introduced rounded borders, as well as the ability to split text into columns. Nowadays, it can pretty much do anything and everything. So let's go over the 3 ways that CSS can show up in an HTML document. The first way is called inline styles. And I'm going to preface this with you should only use inline styles if you have no other choice for styling your HTML element. Inline styles appear inside of individual HTML element tags. They're a very quick way to apply styles to an element, but they're very hard to maintain over the long run. In the previous example, you can see I only added one style to an HTML element, so it looked pretty simple. So let's go ahead and take a look at an example where we have many styles within many HTML elements, and you can see how complicated and unmanageable it becomes. The second way we see CSS in an HTML document is a style tag within the head of the document. We try to avoid this one as well because even though it follows more of the current syntax of how we should use CSS, it's still contained within the HTML document itself and creates a lot of lines within the document. So it becomes really hard to separate your view between the styles and the content of the HTML document. And the third way we find CSS in an HTML document, which is the preferred way, is an external or separate CSS file. Typically, the way we see this done is within your project, you'll create a folder called CSS, and then within that folder, you'll have a CSS file that's named similar to the HTML document that you want to apply that CSS for. In this case, for our example, we have an index.html file, so our CSS file will be called index.css. So now that we've gone over how CSS shows up in an HTML document, let's go over how we can apply CSS to our HTML elements. There are 2 common ways CSS can be applied to an HTML element, and that's with either a class or an ID. So now that we know classes and IDs can both apply CSS to HTML elements, what's really the difference? The big difference is IDs are meant to be used only on one specific HTML element per web page and not applied to more than that, while classes can be applied to more than one element in a web page. So let's take an example like this. You want to create a blue button for your website, and you want that blue button to show up in multiple places on that web page. You would create a class for that blue button and put all the styles in it that would make that button blue. And then you could apply that class to any HTML element in your web page where you want a blue button to show up. So why even use classes and IDs at all? Can't we just use the HTML element name in our CSS file and style things according to that? You could, but the problem with that is, let's say you have a div tag that you want the background to be red on. So you apply div in your CSS file and you give it a background color of red. Well, that's not just going to apply to that single div. It's going to apply to every div tag on that HTML page. So classes and IDs give us the ability to separate out what we want styled a certain way and what elements we don't want styled at all. So let's go ahead and take a look at our next concept, which is targeting child elements with CSS. For those of you that aren't familiar with that term, a child element is just an element within an element. So you say you have this div tag here with an ID of homepage. The h1 tag inside of it is a child element of that div. as well as this paragraph is a child element of that div. And even this unordered list down here is a child element of this div. And the div is a child element of the body. So you don't always have to have an ID or a class on every single element in order to style it. And what I'm going to show you here is how to do that by targeting what we call a parent element and then using the tag name to target the child element. So let's go over to our new index.css document, and we're just going to go ahead and style the homepage ID. IDs in CSS are denoted by a hash or pound sign. And then we just go ahead and type homepage and then curly braces, open and close curly braces. So anything inside these curly braces will apply to the ID of homepage once we link this up with our index.html document. So in here, I'm just going to say, we're going to put some padding in here of, let's just say 15 pixels all around, so that way things don't touch the edge of the web page. And we're just going to leave it like that for right now. So then what we can do is, let's say we want to change the H1 tag a little bit. We want it to be a different font size and we want it to be a different color. We can do that by, again, saying homepage, and then leaving a space and then typing H1 and then do open and close curly braces. The space tells the CSS in the HTML document that we want to target the H1 that is inside the homepage ID. So then we can go ahead and put a font size in here of, let's just say, I don't know, 48 pixels, and a color. We're just going to do red. And we're going to go ahead and save that. And now, so what's going to happen is we're going to have the home page, which is going to have some padding around the outside of it of 15 pixels. And then we're going to have the H1 that's within the home page, and that's going to have a font size of 48 pixels and a font color of red. The third thing I want to show you in CSS here is there's another selector that allows you to directly select direct children of a parent element without affecting any other of the tags within that parent element. And let me show you what that means. So we're going to do a home page space, and then we're going to do the greater than symbol space and then H1. And what this does is it tells the CSS that we only want the direct child H1 of the home page. And let me show you what that would mean. Now, H1's not a great one to do this with, I guess, because you can only have one of these per page, but let's say you could have more than one of them per page. What that style means is anything within that style would apply directly to this H1 tag, but let's say I had an H1 tag inside this list item tag, right? We'll just do an H1 here. That style would not apply to this H1, even though it's within the homepage ID div. It's not a direct child of that homepage div. So this H1 here is a direct child of the list item, but it's not a direct child of the div way up here. So before we can actually go ahead and see this in the web browser, we have to go back over to our index.html page, and we're just going to link the CSS style sheet up to the index.html page so that way it can apply its styles. And we do that with this link tag in the head. And I'm just going to go ahead and do this real quick. We'll go over this more in the next lesson, where we'll actually apply all of this information to your web page. But we're just going to go ahead and link this up real quick just so I can show you. So now we're going to go over to the web page. So what you can see is the very first H1 style that I applied wasn't a direct child selector. It was just apply it to all H1s that are within the homepage ID div. So, and we applied a font color of red to that style. So it should have done both H1s as red initially. But because I did a direct child selector below that of the font color green for the direct child H1 of the homepage tag, you can see the very top H1 is now green. And the bottom one is still red because the bottom one is not a direct child of that homepage div. Now, the final concept I'm going to go over with you today is something called inheritance with CSS. And what inheritance means is some properties within CSS, when you set them in the style sheet, all the elements defined in that CSS file will take on whatever you set that property as. For instance, there's a few inheritable properties, and those would be color, which is your font color, cursor, which is the way the mouse looks on the screen, font size, font family, and text align. So if we set, for example, we set a style for a paragraph tag, and we set that paragraph tag to have the color green and the font size is 18 pixels, which is a little bit a larger font than what you'd normally see for a paragraph. So let's say we have a paragraph tag set up here, and within it, we have another tag. Let's say the emphasis tag, which turns things to an italics text. And we can do an emphasis on, we'll just do this on the very last part of the paragraph. So now we have a tag within the paragraph tag. So we set our paragraph text to the color green. So normally what would happen is the text that's not within the emphasis tags would all be green, and the emphasis tag would still be whatever the default color was, which in this case is black. But because color is an inheritable property, the text within the emphasis tag is also green because it's within the paragraph tag that's been styled as green. And we can see this here. Let's go ahead and come over here, and we're just going to go ahead and do paragraph, color green. We're going to save that. We're going to go ahead and launch our web browser here, and you can see the paragraph text right here is all green, including what was inside the emphasis tag. And this only happens for a select few properties within CSS. Not all CSS properties can be inherited, but the color is one of those properties that can be inherited. Now let's take a property that's not inheritable, like border, for instance. So we're going to come back over here, and we're going to add a border, a black border, a 1 pixel black border, to the paragraph tag. Now, if this was an inherited property, we should see two borders, right? We should see one around the paragraph, the full paragraph, as well as one around text that has the emphasis tag. But because border is not an inheritable property, we're not actually going to see two borders. We're only going to see the border around the paragraph tag. So that's the big difference between inheritable properties and non-inheritable properties. And that's going to do it for CSS Basics. I hope you learned something today. And in the next lesson, we're going to take everything we learned today and we're going to apply it to the web page we're currently building. See you there.